Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, March 16th. Hatsqualin, Squamish, Wayo. We are so fortunate to be meeting, working, and playing on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. Ministerial Order M192. We are ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at this meeting by the following means. The meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis. And the meeting is open to the public for electronic participation via WebEx. Can I have someone move that motion, please? Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are meeting electronically, so just a reminder, Council, that if you leave the meeting or join the meeting, if you could let me know so that can be recorded in the minutes. You just raise your hand if you wish to speak, or if you're connected by audio, you can just say chair. With respect to a vote, council members are only required to state a nay vote. No statements required if you're in favor. Please keep your computer or telephone on mute until it's your turn to speak. We expect you all to be involved in and participate in the meeting. Please text our corporate officer if you're having technical difficulties. And if the technical difficulties are on our side, we'll take a 10-minute recess to sort them out. So I just want to let council know that at quarter to the hour, I do need to leave for a few minutes. And so Councillor Race will be taking over as chair, as acting mayor. And it's not because I'm trying to skip out on what is coming up next, which is our scintillating quarterly financial report. So with that, I will turn it over to our finance staff. And this is our year-end summary. Mr. Russell or Ms. Boxer.
Good afternoon. So we are now, hopefully you are now sharing my. See.
Your volume is very low, Mr. Russell.
Let me adjust that, please. Is that better?
That is better.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. My name is Roland Russell. I'm Senior Financial Analyst for the District of Squamish. We are meeting this afternoon, the special business meeting, to discuss the Q4 financial report, which is the year-end financial report for 2020. Our agenda is here, relatively straightforward. We're going to talk about the 2020 COVID financial impacts. I'll give you a quick update on that. We're going to talk about the results for the year. And lastly, we will open the floor to questions. So the COVID impacts were centered in 3 areas specifically. I mean, they obviously were felt throughout the organization, but there are 3 areas that had direct impacts for COVID and where we were reviewing and translating and collating costs. So one was Parks and Recreation. We had significant revenue losses in Parks and Recreation to the tune of approximately $700,000. Those were offset by the BC COVID Restart Grant. We also had expenses. And
I'll just stop you there, Mr. Russell. Do you have slides that you're presenting? Because we can't see them.
Oh, I am sorry. I do have slides that I am presenting, and on my end it said that.
Is that Ms. Boxer?
Hi, through the mayor. No, I was just stopping so Roland could load his presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Are you now seeing a slide presentation?
We can, but we're seeing your
Oh,
you we can see your upcoming slide as well as your current slide.
okay. Is that better?
Better, thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. On my system, it said that it was sharing, so obviously I had clicked the wrong button or something. Okay, so I also managed to jump ahead a slide. I was speaking of COVID-19 impacts. The impacts and revenue losses were centered in Parks and Recreation. We also had additional expenses in Parks and Recreation. There were savings in Parks and Recreation related to us not hiring contract instructors for programs that were canceled due to COVID. There were also additional costs that occurred within Parks and Recreation due to staff being redeployed. So most of the redeployed staff were in Parks and Recreation, and therefore that is where the expenses for that occurred. One of the other areas that was directly impacted was transit. We had revenue losses in transit due to decreased service levels and ridership. This was offset by a decrease in cost by BC Transit by providing a lease-free holiday. So they gave us some significant savings on the cost of leasing buses. And then lastly, we had other increases in costs, and these increases in costs were charged into a specific fund within emergency response, the emergency management area, to allow us to collate all of the amounts so that we could offset them with the BC Restart Grant. These are all the items on the expense side, so they would relate to increased costs for IT, increased costs for council support, for remote meetings, janitorial costs, and additional staffing costs associated with Parks and Rec with staff that have been redeployed. So that total of the expense side was approximately $500,000, and all of that funding was offset by the BC COVID Restart Grant. Move on to the next item. So overall, on our total operations, we had our excess revenues of approximately $5 million. That is made up primarily of three items. So the COVID Restart Grant for $3.8 million, increase in interest revenues, which is higher than budgeted, $600,000, a one-time recovery resulting from a cleanup of historical holdbacks for approximately $500,000. The last item will be allocated to the general reserve. Interest will be distributed across the reserve balances as part of the year-end process. And of the $3.8 million in COVID Restart Grant, $2.6 million has been directed to the COVID Restart Reserve, and that money will be used in 2021 and future years to offset additional costs related to COVID-19. On the expense side, we saw lower interest costs due to delayed borrowing. The total is about $1.2 million. And of that, $400,000 relates to solid waste and was transferred into the solid waste reserve. That is in conjunction with the plan that we outlined for council earlier in 2020 in conjunction with the 2021 budget to allow us to offset future financial costs for solid waste. As you can see, in keeping with the plan, we were able to direct $400,000 to that reserve in 2020. Other significant savings on the utility sides were in solid waste. We saw a significant reduction in disposal costs in wastewater, and that will be directed to the wastewater reserve. Other items of note are making up the total of approximately $4 million lower expenses were lower special operating projects And we also had savings in special operating projects that were completed. That's just under $400,000. We have budget variances in normal operations, and this is through attrition and other items of that note. And the result of that is that will be funneled into the general reserve. Due to lower establishment within the RCMP, so we budgeted to have 26 members full-time for the year, and they were staffed at a slightly lower level than that. There was a savings in the RCMP contract of approximately $450,000. That amount will be redirected to the protective services provision, and the rationale for that is we are expecting an increase in RCMP costs in the future, just related to their ongoing contract negotiations with the federal government. And they have, in fact, informed us that we should be anticipating further increase in costs in the future years. So we've put aside some money to allow us to manage that. And lastly, transit. Overall in transit, I think part of this is related to the fact that transit also received funding through the BC COVID Restart Grant. They were able to extend the transit fee holiday to a larger amount than we expected. So we anticipated the cost savings would just offset the revenue savings. In fact, they were greater than that. So there is a net surplus, so to speak, in transit. I shouldn't say it's a surplus, it's a reduction in the amount that is tax supported. So the net result of that will be an increase in the general reserve. That's where those funds will be directed. So that is a summary of our general operating results. And if it would be beneficial at this time for council, I could pause here if there are questions related to that. Otherwise, I will continue on with summary of the projects and then open the floor to questions.
Any questions so far, council, or can we finish the rest of the presentation? Okay, let's keep going, Mr. Russell.
Okay. This slide is a pictograph which just tells you how well we did. I think on an overall basis, given that it was a COVID year, we actually, did fairly well. We had a lot of completed projects. We had some delayed projects, but there's a lot of completed projects and a number of projects that were in progress, I should say, and are being carried forward. Most of the delayed projects that you see were delayed as a result of COVID and, responding to those circumstances and the need to put them off. So that's the key element there, and I will go on and we'll speak about some specific projects. In emergency management, the Fire Smart and the community resilience programs were delayed, again, because emergency management was pretty busy last year with other significant factors. In engineering, significant success, pat in the back towards the engineering group for completing the Eagle Viewing Area Dike Master Plan, which was completed and significantly under budget. And we would also like to mention that on the environmental stewardship front, the Climate Change Action Plan project was commenced and made some significant progress last year. On the capital side, we have basically the same pictographs, giving you an idea of where we are there. You'll see COVID has had a smaller impact, let's say, with respect to capital on the delayed projects front, in that just due to the nature of capital projects, building of assets versus operating projects, capital tends to be a little more resilient with respect to that. We were able to continue most of the projects. We completed over half, and approximately a quarter are still in progress. Again, I think pretty good year on an overall basis. And lastly, or nearing the end of the slide presentation, some highlights for capital projects. The Valley Cliff Fire Hall, temporary fire hall, is in service. And because this is related to the end of the year, I will leave it at that. Although I do know from recent pictures that the actual fire hall is now coming out of the ground on site. So that's also good news. On the Uenic Park Sea Dyke, and I do apologize if I mispronounced that name, we are at the design stage, and a fair bit of work has gone into that. And a number of questions and concerns have been answered and raised and answered with respect to the sea dike and its design. With respect to the Jimmy Slough Dike and the culvert, my apologies, aspects to that. We're at detailed design stage, and my understanding is that work will commence on that project in 2021. With respect to the annual rehab projects, most of them were complete. There were a limited number of carry forwards. There was carry forward, I'm pretty sure I got this right, but it's Vanguard Building, and that was respect to paving, and on Pemberton Avenue with respect to active transportation. Those are all the comments that I would like to make with respect to our capital projects. And at this point, I am going to turn it back to council to allow for questions and discussion. And I'm going to click on this thing that says stop sharing. And
Thank you, Mr. Russell. I'm going to actually hand the chair over to Councillor Race to fill in during my absence. So he will manage the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, I will turn it back to the chair as noted. And
thank you. No, I was just unmuting myself. Council, are there any comments or questions? Councillor Pettengill?
Yes, thank you. Just on page 6 of our report, is in one-year slides, I'm not sure which one, but you talk about where some of the savings are being allocated to specific reserves or specific purposes. And there's a few things that are just going to the general reserve. But with transit in particular in mind, do we have a mechanism or a policy of setting aside that money, so the 150,000 from transit going in general reserve, that's somehow earmarked for transit in the future? Or does it, anything that's going to general reserve, it's just general reserve, and at a future budget we decide what happens?
Through the chair, I would be more than happy to answer that question. In this specific instance, there is a transit reserve. There's a transit reserve that is managed on our behalf by BC Transit, and BC Transit gave us an option to place additional savings from 2020 into that reserve. So we moved $170,000 of savings for BC Transit from 2020 into the BC Transit reserve this year, or say for 2020. And we're hoping to be able to use that money, if necessary, to offset COVID-related costs in 2021 if we find that the transit, transit hasn't rebounded as strongly as we anticipate.
So if I might clarify then, the money we're putting into general reserve that you talk about here, the $150,000, we sort of moved nearly the same amount into the BC Transit reserve. So effectively, we have moved the savings into the BC Transit reserve. Is that?
I would say yes. Yes, that is a good interpretation.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just wondering if staff can speak a little bit to the carry forward. So as a percentage of budget for the special operating projects, we're sitting at about 22% of the 2020 budget being carrying forward. And for capital projects, it's closer to 60%. Just wondering if staff can speak to the variability in those numbers, and if they are, granted last year was a unique year, appreciate that there were lots of shifts that had to be made, but how far or close is that to like our 2019 carry forward, for example? Is that in line, or is that substantially greater than what we would typically see?
Through the chair, I may. For special operating projects, the carry forward in 2020 of just over $800,000 is very similar to the amount we carried forward in 2019. I believe 2019 number was $780,000. So, again, approximately $800,000. So that's fairly consistent. With respect to capital, there's a bit of variability in here. And the major reason is that we have some significant capital projects, some of which are externally driven. So, for example, Oceanfront is run by by the Newport, who are doing the development. So if they choose not to develop or delay their development, then we would have to carry the project forward, because we have to include the project in the plan to be able to spend the money. So we have the same problem with respect to things like land acquisition. If we manage a land acquisition, great, but if we don't find the piece of land that we're looking for, then that's going to create a carry forward. We also have some very large projects this year that were being carried forward, in which spending had commenced. So Fire Hall is an example, significant project, but a portion of it was carried forward. And also 2 significant diking projects where the design phase extended a little longer than we had anticipated. So a little less work was accomplished within the year. And so again, significant amounts were carried forward. So the 26 million is definitely an anomaly. We would not expect that significant a carry forward in any given year, but there are some pretty compelling reasons for why the carry forward was so large in 2020. And obviously, if you have specific questions with respect to any of those projects, staff are available to assist with those questions.
No, that makes good sense. Thanks for the explanation.
You are welcome. Councillor Race, we can't hear you.
Bad habit. Used to muting. Did you have your hand up, Councillor Pettengill?
No, I was just pointing out my ear that we couldn't hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I was trying to keep up, but I didn't. When you were mentioning that this almost $10 million of what used to be called accumulated surplus has been distributed amongst a variety of different reserves, but just in rough terms, do you know approximately how much is going into general reserve? And the second part of that is the report talks about setting some criteria for how we deal with monies in general reserve. And I'm wondering if staff have any kind of timeline for that.
Through the chair, I'll attempt the first one, and I'll let our CFO Heather Boxer attempt the second one. Although I might be the person who's doing the work, but she might be setting my schedule with respect to the second part of this question. I think if we do the mathematics, and to be fair, we haven't gone all the way through the year-end process, so we don't have a tight number on what we're looking at going into the general reserve. But based on the analysis of the items that we've highlighted to date, I would suggest that of these values, we're probably in the $3 to $4 million range at this point. And I would think that may go higher once we finish all the other accounting transactions that are required.
Ms. Boxer.
Hi, thank you through the chair. So two things, just a further clarification on your first question. So the initial accumulated surplus has not been redistributed amongst other reserves. That's just the variance that Roland was speaking to, or Mr. Russell was speaking to, was for this year. So that will stay within the general reserve. The forthcoming plan, the plan is for the general operating reserve is to bring it for the year end process. We want to establish the actual balance at year end and then develop the plan. We'll bring it forward to council to review. So what, around the first week of May.
Thank you. And my second question was with respect to the design of Winnock Park. Does staff have any idea when that project might actually commence construction?
I'm going to defer that question to David Ralston, who I believe is on the line.
Go ahead, Mr. Ralston, if you're here.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We have just received a 90% design for the park, and we are submitting permitting applications through Transport Canada, DFO, and the Inspector of Dikes. We expect that will take 4 months or so, and our fisheries window starts in mid-August and extends to January. So we're targeting construction beginning in September, with assuming that permitting goes well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And council, any more questions or comments? Nope. Thank you very much, Mr. Russell, Ms. Bockrud. It's been an interesting year, and thank you very much for your efforts in this. Council, I'll move us on now to 4 sub 2, which is, yes, go ahead, Ms. Councilor Donner.
There is a motion to receive the
Oh, I beg your
quarterly
pardon.
report,
Thank you very
and
much.
I'll move that.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councilor Herford? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your help. So the second one is the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District Resolution. Ms. Glenda, do you know who's presenting in this?
Yes, Councillor Reyes, that would be Heather Walshman.
Mayor, members of council, this is Roland Russell. I will be giving you a quick update on this. In the fall, in October, we provided an analysis to council, which reflected our best guess at the time of what the results at the recreation center were going to be with respect to the pool and the aquatic center, I should say. And subsequent to that, that was pre-COVID grant. Okay, so subsequent to that, we got our final results for the year, and as a result of the final results, 2 significant things occurred. One, there were sufficient personnel cost savings in recreation and the aquatic side of recreation to offset the revenue loss. And in addition to that, there were significant savings on the maintenance side of the aquatics function due to the facility closure to create a significant variance. So rather than the significantly increased dollars that were requested originally in the fall of 2020, we have worked on a program with the SLRD between Suzanne LaFrance, their CFO, and Heather Oxford, our CFO, to reduce the amount of our request for 2020. And so we are asking council to forward a revised requisition request to the SLRD for the aquatic center, and the result of this will be reduced taxes for those people in Area D. And there is a motion before you to move that, so I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you. Councilor, were there any comments or questions about this? I had one. just a little bit off topic, but I noticed in the report, it talks about the existing debt running until approximately 2035, if I recall it correctly. And that struck me as odd because the pool was built, I think, around 1990, 91, somewhere in there. And so it seemed an extraordinary long period to have debt. More than I'm usually the longest I've been aware of has been 20 years. And I'm just wondering if that could be explained. There's always been talk, not really formally, about is it time to sort of take over that pool or get rid of the debt or something like that. And I'm just curious where the debt actually stands.
I believe I can answer that question through the chair. In our conversation with the SLRD, we were informed that there's just over $500,000 debt still outstanding. The debt was issued in 2005, and it was issued for 30 years, which is a rather long period, but that was what the debt was issued for. So that's why there's roughly another 15 years of debt to go.
Ms. Bachred?
Hi, through the chair, just a further clarification on that. The history that we've been informed of is that the debt was issued against the life of the asset. So they were trying to align the life of the asset with the debt, the load that it provided. So that is why the longer period, the aquatic center would be around a 30-year building. So.
And there's approximately $500,000 left outstanding? Yeah.
That's correct.
So it's maybe not a discussion for today, but it'd be interesting to see if there would be any advantage to us trying to pay that out. But I'll just leave that for another discussion. I'll let staff think about that. Councillor, any other questions? There is a suggested motion. Council approve the revised 2021-2025 local service area budget request community facilities Squamish Pool for submission to the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. Is there a mover? Councillor Herford, seconded Councillor Stoner. Further comment? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. That completes our open agenda. My intent is not to carry on very far without the mayor. So what I will do is, we have a little bit of time on our hands, but I will ask for a motion to close. Councillor Herford, Councillor Stoner seconds. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then I will recess this meeting to 1:45, which is the originally scheduled start of the closed meeting. And hopefully the mayor is back by that time. Okay, and then we'll come back on the closed link.